and how to pretty much navigate around. So for all of the people coming in, my name is Vijay. I'm the organizer for a group called JavaScript LA/HackBuddy. Basically, it's a software engineering group. The concept is that if you're trying to learn to code, you want to hang out with us because we pretty much will talk about different topics each month about software engineering related concepts. A lot of our stuff started in JavaScript, and we moved towards web development as well as React and using frameworks like React, Angular, Vue.js. This year, try to keep things a little different. One thing I'll say is just real quick, if you are not actively speaking, please mute yourself. I'll go ahead and do that real quick. So while that's going on, basically, we do have these meetups, every month, and we kind of talk about software engineering concepts. We have, meetups that you can see on this website called javascriptla.net. And so today's is Start in Flutter. This is something that's come up a lot of different times. We have specifically kind of asked around, do people use React Native? Are they interested in app development? Are they interested in things like Dart, Flutter? So this is stuff that's new and cutting edge. And so we're just kind of trying to learn along. And so Sylvana's here to show us how that works, the ropes. If you like what you see, I do recommend that you join our channel. The easiest way to do that is basically join the mailing list. And then you'll get updates each week. We have weekly newsletter now, which we're doing, which is really cool. I really like it because it gives people a chance to kind of be more familiar with upcoming technologies. Stuff changes a lot. Sometimes waiting a whole month just to get news is kind of, it's weird to me. I kind of feel like, why would you wait so long? So if you are somebody who wants more up-to-date news, we have a newsletter that comes out every week. So you want to be on the email list. And then basically, if you are somebody who likes chatting, you can join us on Discord and talk to us there. We have a lot of cool people, in this Discord channel. We also have a Slack group, which you can join as well if you like Slack. And then if you like coding together, you can also do some coding projects with us. Team Hack is what we advertise a lot, especially in the last few meetups, we say, come and pair program with us, do coding together. We were working on different concepts. I think what might happen with this group is we may also start doing micro projects just to also give some of the newer people a chance to kind of try something out, learn it, and just show what they can do or get the help that they need faster. So those are things that are coming. And obviously the best way to be informed is to just be in our mailing list, and you'll get all the information you need on there. If you want to connect with me, I'm Vijay. This is my LinkedIn. And basically you can, find out more about me, my journey as a software engineer. If you like the group, you can also follow us on LinkedIn as well. This is the information for LinkedIn. And then we do have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I'll put those links in the chat afterwards. I just wanted to ask also, do we have somebody from Farmers today who wants to give a quick talk about Farmers? Because Farmers is our sponsor, and we want to make sure that they get some time to talk about it.
Hey, Vijay. Yes, you do.
Perfect.
So yeah, I'm from Farmers. I'm Vaibhav Shah, and I've been with Farmers for about 3 years, and I'm part of the mobile team, right? We have, we work on digital customer experience when it comes to developing software. So we are at the customer side and building applications for customers, right? People who want to buy a policy, who want to renew the policies, all types of policies, auto insurance, home insurance, there's a whole list of products that we have in our apps. We have been investing our time in a lot of native technologies when it comes to mobile application development, iOS and Android. We have a team and we are growing. We have a ton of projects in the pipeline, and we are always looking for alternative technologies, right? That compares with native mobile app development. React, JS, Flutter is today we have Flutter, and we would like to learn more about it. How does it compare, and also looking to connect with you guys. So feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in joining Farmers, and we can take it from there. Feel free to check out our job openings. We are always hiring, not just in mobile app, but also on the website areas. So we are growing very rapidly, I would say. That's all I have, Vijay.
Awesome. Perfect. And just, yeah, to reiterate, Farmers is a great place to take your skill to the next level. So, if you do learn something from JavaScript LA, whether you're a new person or even somebody who's been in the business for a while, I feel like if you learn anything from here or you build stuff with us, you might want to give Farmers a shot just because they're looking for people with talent. And so I'd be happy to help anybody who's looking for work get over to that side. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into Sylvana's presentation. You ready, Sylvana?
Yes, ready to go.
Okay, I'm gonna give you co-host abilities, and then I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So you should be able to share your screen now.
Sounds good, thanks.
And at this time, like I said to everybody else, please make sure that you've muted yourself if you're not the active speaker. If you have a question, please go ahead and put in the chat first, and then we'll call on you if we need to give more clarification.
Yeah, I will try to keep an eye on the chat and make sure that's up here so I can attend to those. But yeah, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me here today as we talk about building apps with Flutter. A little bit about myself. My name is Sylvana. I'm a software engineer on the engagement team at Codecademy. Some of the projects that we have built include the weekly targets, the new user workspaces, and the up-and-coming collaborative profiles. In addition to the work that I do with the engagement team, I have also done some work on our mobile app, which is built using React Native. And just to preface this entire talk, I just want to point out that I learned Flutter for personal projects, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm by no means a subject matter expert, but I'm hoping that today I can relay some of the findings that I had as I've explored this toolkit. And just to whet your appetites a bit, I thought I'd show you one of the very first projects that I built with Flutter. So this is an application that generates a list of restaurants in your area, puts them on a wheel, and then you can spin that wheel to decide where you might want to go out to eat. So yeah, like I said, this was one of the first things I built when I learned Flutter. So hopefully that gives you some insight into what's possible right off the bat with this framework. Cool. So before we get into things, just a brief overview of the agenda. I'll start by talking about what Flutter is. Then I'll outline some of the reasons why I really enjoy using Flutter. But a bulk of this presentation will actually be us working together to build a Flutter application. So what is Flutter? So according to the docs, it is Google's UI toolkit for building beautiful, natively compiled applications for mobile, web, desktop, and embedded devices from a single code. A big mouthful. So let's go ahead and try to simplify that definition. So in order to simplify the definition, we need to understand the difference between native app development and cross-platform app development. So native development is when you build a code base for each platform. So for example, if you're building an iOS app, you would use Xcode and Swift or C++. Whereas if you want to build an Android application, you would use Xcode and Kotlin or Java. This differs from cross-platform development, where you are building one code base for all platforms. And some of the frameworks that are considered cross-platform include React Native and, of course, Flutter. So with those concepts in mind, we can simplify the definition to just be Google's UI toolkit for building cross-platform applications. But what is actually included in this toolkit and how do we use it? So the first thing to note about Flutter is that it uses a programming language called Dart, which is object-oriented and strongly typed. And when you're writing your Dart code, you can take advantage of the Flutter API, which provides you with widgets, utility functions, and packages that make development a lot easier and faster. And we'll talk about some of these things shortly. So once you finish writing out your Dart code, the Flutter SDK actually compiles your Dart code into native machine code for iOS and Android, for example. So now that we have a better idea of what Flutter is and how it works, I want to highlight some of the reasons why I really enjoy working with Flutter. As someone who is very comfortable with React,
are you changing your slides? Because we're not seeing changes.
Oh, really? Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, let me stop sharing and try again. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you for bringing that up, David.
Can you see right now if I'm changing them?
It doesn't seem like your slides are changing. I think what we're seeing is the Chrome browser. And so it says Notion.
Okay, let's see. Oh, I see. Okay. I'm so sorry. I was sharing the wrong desktop this whole time. Thank you to whoever pointed that out. I guess I can go back for a second. I'll just reference this diagram that I had before. So yeah, this is what I was, yeah, sorry. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that you went through like 5 minutes of a presentation and then I was just talking. But yeah, so this is the diagram that I was referencing before. So here we can see how sort of the different aspects of the Flutter toolkit work together. So you have your Dart code here, and then that relies, or you can take advantage of the Flutter API in your Dart code, which provides you with packages and utility functions that make development a lot easier. And then that Dart code gets compiled into native machine code. So hopefully that makes sense in retrospect. Apologies that I did not have that up when I originally explained it. Cool, yeah. So now that we have a better understanding of what Flutter is, I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why I really enjoy using Flutter. As someone who is very comfortable with React Native, there's a lot of similarities and in some of the best aspects of React that Flutter also shares. So for example, with React, you have a component hierarchy. And in Flutter, you have what's called a widget tree. So everything within your Flutter application is considered a widget. And similarly to React, you can pass props between widgets. And then finally, just like in React, you can have stateless and stateful widgets depending on whether or not your widgets need to manage state. And we'll talk about all of these aspects throughout the presentation. In addition to those, I also find that with Flutter, the packages are really well maintained and there's a lot of thorough documentation. So whenever I get stuck, I find it really easy to unblock myself because everything is already well documented in the official docs, but also a lot of people have shown their process of troubleshooting through some of these pain points. But obviously, this is all just my opinion. So throughout this presentation, I hope to give you some insight into what it's like to develop with Flutter and hopefully motivate you to try it out for yourself and decide if this is something that you also like. So getting started with Flutter is pretty straightforward. Once you have the SDK installed on your machine, you can use the Flutter command line tool to get started. This is similar to Create React App. So you can just, in your terminal, type in Flutter create and then the name of your project. One caveat there, your project name needs to be underscored. So if you try to use hyphens, it will error out. But once you've done that, it'll generate a directory that looks something like what you're seeing on the left. Now, I won't go into all of these files and folders and what they are, but I want to highlight some of the most important ones. So first is this pubspec.yaml file. This is similar to package.json if you're familiar with that. It essentially just allows you to add packages or dependencies to your application. And I'll go into a little bit more detail into what that looks like in just a bit. Then you'll also notice that there is an Android and an iOS folder, and this is where the native code lives. For the most part, you won't ever have to touch the files in these folders, but sometimes when you add certain packages, you may be asked to modify one of the files inside of the folder. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about those, just wanted to point them out. Most of the changes that you will do while building a Flutter app will happen in this lib folder. And if you were to open this lib folder, you would find a main.start file. And the code might look something like what you're seeing on the right here. And that code would generate what you're seeing on the left. So let's actually go ahead and dive into this code line by line. So at the very top here, I don't know if that might be blocking it. See if I can move this here. Okay. So at the very top, you'll see an import statement. As I said before, you can add packages in your pubspec.yaml file, and the code will look something like what you're seeing in this code block here. And then you can click save on that file and run flutter pub get to actually install those dependencies, and you'll be able to import them into your files and use the methods or components that are provided by that package. Now, one thing that I'd like to know about this specific import statement is that it's very similar to importing React in your React component files, if you've worked with that. Essentially, what this line is doing is that it's giving you access to a library of widgets that are provided by Flutter. Cool. So just underneath that import statement, you'll see a main function, which is actually rendering our application. Now, main is a predefined function in Dart. It serves as the entry point to our application. So again, this is pretty similar to React DOM.render, if you're familiar with that. And then within this main function, we're calling a method named run app. And this is actually inflating the given widget and attaching it to the screen. In other words, it's just rendering the given widget. Great. So the last part of this file is actually a class. I'm defining my root widget, which in this case is called my app. And whenever you're building out a widget in Flutter, it will need to be a subclass of either the stateless widget class or the stateful widget class, depending on whether or not you need to manage state within that widget. In this case, this is a purely presentational widget, so I'm extending the stateless widget class. And you'll see that I am overriding the build method within this class. The build method is just a method that describes the UI in terms of other lower level widgets. And as you can see, this build method takes in an object that has a type build context. In simple terms, it's just an object that contains information about the widget's location in the tree. It can provide you with some useful methods to find out more about, let's say, the parent of the widget or one of the siblings of the widget. But for the most part, you won't really need to use that context object, or at least I haven't had to in the applications that I've built. Great. And so then within this build method, you are returning a widget that you want to be rendered, right? So in this case, I'm using widgets provided by the Flutter library. So for example, this material app is a widget provided by Flutter. This text widget is again provided by Flutter. And in this case, this material app widget takes in two props, or it can take in two props. The first prop is called home, and it should take in another widget. In this case, I'm giving it a text widget, and this, whatever it receives as the home prop is what will be rendered in the main content of the material app widget. In addition to the home prop, it also takes in another prop called debug show checked mode banner, which is an extremely long prop name, but essentially all it is a Boolean that determines whether or not the debug banner will show when your app is built. Cool. I'm actually going to take a quick pause here because I know I've thrown a whole lot of information just from that one file. And if you're not familiar with like Dart or Flutter, it might be really confusing. So I want to take a moment for you guys to ask any questions that you may have, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself. I'll give it like 10, 15 seconds.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Sorry?
I'm audible, right?
Go ahead, and would you mind just kind of also writing what you want to say too in the chat, just so we can, because it's hard to hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will write down. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
No problem.
So where can I find widget library to see what are the options?
Yeah. I realize that it might be a little confusing at this point, but I'm hoping to this snippet or whatever. I'm hoping to get rid of any confusion in a moment. I will show, as we start going through the demo, I will show you some of the documentation, but I will drop in the chat the official docs. So it's flutter.dev. So if you go to that website, you'll find documentation about all the widgets and the props that they take in. But I will also, once we get into the demo, show you some of the widgets that we'll be using and show you the documentation there.
Does that help with your question, Alon? I think you were saying, where's the widget library? And I think she just dropped a link for the widget library on flutter.dev.
Yeah, thank you. I saw it.
Perfect. One comment that I'll give too is it does look like JavaScript. In fact, it looks like ES6.
Yeah, thank you. That's another question, wasn't asked, but thought of.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So we can go ahead and move on to the next part. So another similarity between React and Flutter is the ability to modularize your code. And what I mean by that is that you're able to sort of break up your widget tree. By using import statements, you can spread your code out into different files. So what you can see here on the right-hand side is I've modified the code that we just went through. So I actually built out a home widget and imported that into our main.dart file and used that as a prop for the material app widget. And as you can see, the home widget that I built takes in a string. So let's actually look at the home widget to see how I did that. So again, just like before, the home widget is a class that extends stateless widget because again, this is just a presentational component. But as you can see, there's a few lines here that we haven't seen before. And if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, this might look very familiar to you, but just in case anyone is not, I'll go through what these lines mean. So that first line is just declaring an instance variable for this class. In this case, it's a string. The name of the variable is title. And then that keyword final is similar to const in JavaScript. It's just saying that we can only set the value for this variable one time. Cool, so that's the first line. The second line, I'm using a constructor to define the parameters for this class and assign each parameter to an instance variable. Now, if you're not familiar with what a constructor is, it's a special Dart class method that's called when an instance is created. And it should always have the same name as the class. So if you're still a little confused, this is how I sort of conceptualize it. So that second line is essentially saying, I want the value of my instance variable to be whatever this class receives when it's initialized. So again, if I go back to 2 slides, in this case, the instance variable title will have a value my app. And then as you can see here, I'm using that to display the text that it receives. Cool. So those are some of the basic concepts and some of the basic code that you might see in a Flutter application. After this, we're going to dive into the demo. So again, I'm just going to take a pause in case anyone's confused. I want to make sure that gets addressed before we start coding together.
Yeah, I already have a question. I missed it. Where do you pass the text my app from?
Sorry?
Where are you passing the my app text into
Yeah.
into the
Into the home
constructor?
component? Yeah, so that's happening here. So you can see here in this line that I'm hovering over right now, right? I'm calling the home widget, and then I'm passing in this my app string into that instance of the home class. So this is where I'm giving it the title. So then this gets provided to that class. And if we go to the code for that class, it'll get given to this text widget, which just displays the text that it's given. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Got it.
Any other questions?
It's like a good pattern of the factory pattern, right? In some ways, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You're passing in a string and then getting back a completely built, widget module in some ways, right? Is that kind of like what's going on?
Yeah, yeah. And I realize that this is kind of like, you wouldn't ever really do this because there's already like a text widget. Essentially, I'm just like adding an unnecessary widget here, but just wanted to, show how you can build out a basic widget that takes in a prompt.
Nice, right?
Does the main can receive parameters, props, I guess how you call it?
This main function?
Yeah. Can it receive anything from outside?
No. So this main function will only, this serves as the entry point to your application. So all it should do is render the root widget. So it won't take in anything.
So it's almost like the same in React, where you would say document get element by ID, and then you would render like the app. Okay, so
exactly.
It's similar to that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if anyone's familiar with React applications, yes, just like that. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the demo, but please feel free to cut me off at any point if you have questions. I don't want to move on if there is any confusion, or feel free to drop it in the chat as well. Cool. So what we will be building for this demo is a simple application that just generates a random image. So when you click this button down here, it'll generate a new image here. And so in order to build out this app, we're going to have to do three main things. So the first thing is that we'll want to build out a stateful widget so that we can manage a random number variable. Then we'll want to use that random number to generate a random image URL. And then lastly, we'll want to use an image widget to actually display the image at that URL. So this might feel like a little scary or might be confusing at the moment, but hopefully as we get into it, it'll all make sense. And like I said, feel free to stop me at any point. If you'd like to follow along, I do have two ways that you can join me if you'd like. If you also just want to, follow along and, not do it yourself, that's totally fine. I know sometimes I can't multitask like that, but I just dropped in the Zoom chat. The first is a link to FlutLab. FlutLab is an online editor that allows you to build out applications and actually run them in a simulator. So it's a really great way, if you don't want to download the Flutter SDK on your machine, you can do it all through that online editor. So that's the first link that I dropped. And then the second is the actual GitHub repo with the starter code. If you already have the Flutter SDK installed, then you can clone the repo and follow along as well. And these links will be in the slides if you also want to give it a try after the presentation. Cool. Let's see. I'm going to verify this time. Can you guys see my code and the simulator running right now, or are you not seeing that?
Yep, I see the application.
The repo we see.
Are
Yeah,
you seeing? Go ahead.
Sorry, so you're seeing VS Code? Never mind.
I see your screen. If anybody wants to vouch to like that, you see the app on the right-hand side and the code in the middle and the terminal at the bottom.
Okay, cool.
We should be good to go. Cool.
That
All right.
sounds like what I would expect. Cool. Sorry, a little paranoid now. Okay, cool. So let me actually go ahead and stop this here so I can show you where we're getting started here. So this again is available in the FlutLab link that I showed and also the repo that I shared. But essentially the code is just what we've been going through up until this point in the presentation. So we have our main.dart file, which imports our home widget and calls it down here. And then we have our home widget defined in this file here. Let me actually zoom in a bit. Cool. So that's the code. I just want to show you how you actually run a Flutter application. So this first step isn't necessary, but if you want it running on like a phone simulator, you'll have to download Xcode, but you can then run this line here, open-a simulator, and that'll open up the Xcode simulator. And then once you've done that, you can use Flutter Run to actually run the application on that simulator. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. It is actually already running, but I'll rerun it. And again, this is what the app currently looks like, just displaying my app text. So nothing too fancy so far. Cool. So just to reference real quick, this is what we'll be building out, right? So to start, I'm actually just going to start building out the UI for this. I'm not going to give it functionality yet, just want to get the bare bones going. So while that's launching, it takes a little second the first time around. While that is going, I'm going to go ahead and modify this. So the first thing that I want to do is I actually am not going to be displaying, any text here. So I'm going to get rid of this. I don't want to be passing anything to the home widget. So I'm going to get rid of that. But then that means I have to go into my home widget and get rid of these two lines here, which actually allow us to take in the widget. So let's go ahead, or not take in the widget, sorry, take in the prop. And then here for now, I'm just going to say hello world. Cool. So now it should just be some sort of hard coding hello world here. And whenever I make changes, you'll see that it didn't automatically change. So all you do is hit R in the terminal and it'll hot reload, and then you'll be able to see the changes. So now you can see on the right that we're showing our new string. Cool. But this isn't what our app is actually going to look like. So let's go ahead and start building out our demo app. So let's get rid of this. And instead, I'm actually going to return a widget called Scaffold. And now we can go ahead and jump into the docs to understand what Scaffold is and what it expects to receive. So let's get out of here. I have pulled up here the docs. So again, this is at flutter.dev. You can see I've pulled up the docs for the Scaffold widget. And this is a really useful widget because it sort of provides you with a basic layout, like a common layout that you might want to use. So you can give it like an app bar, you can give it some content that'll go here in the middle, you can add a floating action button, and it'll receive all these things as props. So if I go down here, I've got to go through. The nice thing about Flutter documents is that it provides you with a lot of sample codes. But if I go past those, I can go down here and it'll show me the properties that this widget can receive. So you can see here, it can receive a prop called app bar, which is a widget that will just be displayed at the top as an app bar. It can also take in background color. It can take in a body, which is the primary content of the Scaffold widget. There's a lot of things that you can provide this widget with. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into like what the docs looks like and how the Scaffold widget works. So I'm going to go ahead and invoke my Scaffold widget. And as we saw, it takes in a body prop, and the body should be another widget, right? So in this case, I'm actually going to use another widget called center, which, as the name implies, just centers the content And if you're curious, again, these are the docs for it, gives you an explanation of what it is, and then it shows you some of the things that it receives. In this case, I'm going to give it a child that I want it to center. So let's go ahead and do that. Child. And for my child, I'm going to give it an image so that we can show the image. And nope, I want to make sure the chat isn't going off. Okay, cool. So I'll show you in the docs in just a second, but for image, it has a method called network, which takes in a URL and it'll display that on the widget. So I'm going to grab my URL from over here. For now, I'm just going to hard code it. So put that there. Oops. Did not grab the thing I meant to. Apologies, I am trying to use an iPad as an extra monitor because I'm not at home and it's a struggle. Okay, cool. So this is just a hard-coded string that we're going to use. And again, like I said, I'll show you the docs for the image class. So this is our image widget, a widget that displays an image. And if you go down here, you can see it says image.network can be used for obtaining an image from a URL. So that's what I'm doing here, just doing image.network, providing it with the URL that I want it to display. Cool. So let's actually go ahead and pause there. I'm going to save that, reload my app, and hopefully I haven't broken anything and we can see stuff. Okay, cool. So let's recap what we just did. We used the Scaffold widget, which can take in a whole bunch of things like an app bar, a body, a floating action button. But for now, all we did was give it a body. And that body is a center widget. That center widget received an image widget as a child that displays the provided URL. So I know it's a lot to take in when you're first looking at it, but it's actually pretty nice that in just 3 lines of code, we were able to do all of that. Any questions with how we've gotten this far?
Can you please go to that main.dot file?
Main.dart, sure.
Okay. From there, we are calling home widget. Okay, now I got that.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So the image network acts like a fetch request in some ways, right? Is that what it's doing? Okay.
Yeah, which
So
is really nice that it's just like handles it out of the box.
Yeah, like it's just basically kind of what happens, like if it fails, then what do you usually see? Like let's
It'll
say,
actually, which is like not ideal. You'll probably like want to set some sort of, catch, but it'll just like show the error in place of the image, just like as a string. So not great, but there are ways around it. Yeah.
Okay, but it does show you some error, right? Like some kind of error. Does it break the app, or does it show just a string?
It does not. Yeah,
Okay.
It just shows the error as a string now.
That's interesting. All right, cool. Sorry, somebody else had a question.
Yeah.
Do we want to import any library for using this image.network?
You said, do you have to import the library? Is that what you said?
Do we want to import any library?
Yeah, so this is sort of what I was talking about before. So if you're familiar with React, right, whenever you write a React component, you have to import React so that you can use, the React components. That's similar to what we're doing here. So this first line here is importing that widget library for us. So if we didn't have, like if I remove this line, you can see that I get a bunch of errors because all of those things are provided by the Flutter library. Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay.
Cool.
Can you tell us a little bit about Dart, just the programming language itself? Like, how does it vary from JavaScript, especially for new people like myself included?
Yeah. I mean, the first is that it's object oriented. I think the other difference or main difference that I found is that it's typed as well. If you've used TypeScript with JavaScript, then it may not feel so foreign. but definitely like, for example, oh, I don't have it here. But like when we're using like, you know, final string title, like that is much more like similar to what you might see in Java, and like using constructors, things like that. Like that's all similar to what you might find in an object-oriented programming language. Yeah, I think another like weird aspect of Dart, but also Flutter, is the fact that everything, and I won't go into this in like, it's out of scope of this demo, but the styling is also a part of the widget. So the styling is actually another prop that you provide to the widget. So it almost feels like if you've used React Native, how you have inline styling, it's almost like that. So there are definitely some differences, and it takes some getting used to when it comes to Dart.
Yeah, but on the whole, it looks more like, you know, like a marriage between like ES6, TypeScript, and Java in some ways, right? Like
definitely, yeah.
Or maybe not Java, but just TypeScript and ES6, I would say.
Yeah, I think they have some
JavaScript
aspects of
like.
Java.
So you're gonna be using it for front end only, or it does also back end? Middle tier?
I think, yeah, so Dart was developed by Google specifically for building UIs. So you would only use this in front end, as far as I know, unless someone has created some weird backend thing with Dart.
One more question, not to derail you so much, but
No.
is Dart a language that is compiled? You know, like, do you have to compile it down? Is that what's going on here? You know, like, is there a runtime for it? I think there is, right? But
I believe so, but I don't want to speak out of turn and give you wrong information.
Okay.
But I believe that it is compiled, yes.
Right, because like you need, you know, for the browser for JavaScript, you need to have like, you know, a runtime for JavaScript, but then, you know, like you get that for free with the browser with Chrome, or like some other, you know, browser like Firefox, Node.js and stuff like that. Here we're running something Google created, I guess, underneath the hood. But is the expectation that you can run this code in the browser as well, or is it just for apps only?
Yeah, so you could run this. Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy. Like when it first started, Flutter was only specifically for mobile development, but they've expanded this to be able to work in browser. It can even work. I've never actually tried this, but it can also work with like other applications. So for example, like a fridge, if your fridge can have apps, it can work with that. So it's very flexible and like super cross-platform, which is crazy.
So basically, if you've developed once, it can run, it's like progressive app, it can run on different resolutions?
Yes, yeah.
Automatically?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go on with your presentation. Actually, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I want to save some of these questions for later because I know we can pile up on you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, cool. Let's see. All right, so we have our basic image showing right now, but another part of the UI, which if I go back just to reference it, we need to add this little floating button there. So let's go ahead and add that to our application. Cool. So if I go here and go back to our scaffold, I'm going to put it up here. So another property that our scaffold can take in is floating action button. So again, this is going to expect to receive a widget, and there is actually a floating action button widget. And I will go ahead and again open the docs for this. If I go to floating action, yeah, it's just a button. And if you see here, yeah, you can see examples of it here. And some of the properties that it expects include, let's see if I can find it, on press, similar to on click. And then another thing that it expects is not an icon, a child. So like what will actually be displayed inside of this button, right? So those are the two properties that we're going to use here. So first, on pressed. Since I don't want to add any functionality right now, I'm just going to set this to null, and I'll give it an actual function later on. And then for child, I'm actually going to give it an icon. So I'm going to use the icon widget. And the icon widget expects an icon. So we can actually grab icons from the widget library by doing icons dot, and that gives us access to the library of widgets. I won't pull up the docs for this, but like you can see here, there's a bunch already, like, add a photo. So these are all icons that are provided by the Flutter API. I'm going to use an icon called refresh for that button. Cool. Let's go ahead and save that. Reload. Cool. So now you can see we're seeing our button over here. Awesome. So we have the basic layout of our app ready to go. But obviously right now it doesn't have any functionality. So let's talk about how we can actually add some functionality to it. In order to do that, we're going to need to convert our home widget into a stateful widget. Let me present that. So in order to create a stateful widget, you're going to want to, again, extend the stateful widget class. And then you're going to want to override the create state method within that class. And this method just creates a state object. And this will be called when your widget is built. And just a quick side note, this underscore indicates that it's a private method, but it's totally not necessary. Cool. So this
convention.
Yeah, it's a convention. Yeah. So this home state class actually stores the data for our widgets, and that data can change over the lifetime of the widget. So you can see here, I have my home state, and that's extending the state class. Cool. But obviously, just doing that won't actually allow us to manage state. So in order to do that, we'll actually want to create within this home state class, we'll want to create our state variables. In this case, just as an example, I'm going to set a state variable called greeting, and I'm going to initialize it to be a string named hello. Cool. So I've initialized my state variable. Then down here, I've created a function called change greeting, and I'm using the set state method to update our state variable within that function. So set state, you might recognize something similar with React hooks, right? We also have a set state method with React. So I'm just, again, calling that set state method, and with it, that expects a function that will reset our state variable. In this case, I'm changing the greeting to now be hi. Cool. Once we call that, that'll notify the framework that state has changed, and it'll trigger a rebuild, right? So you can see down here, in this case, I'm saying when this button is pressed, I'm going to call this change greeting method. That's going to go here. It's going to change our state. So it's going to cause this widget to be rebuilt. Cool. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and convert our home widget into a stateful widget. Now you might be thinking, a stateful widget looks very different than a stateless widget, right? With a stateful, we need to have our class for our widget, and then we have to have a separate class for our state, right? That's a lot of refactoring to do. The nice thing about VS Code and Flutter is that you can add the Flutter extension to your VS Code. And then if you just hover over your widget and click Command period, you can see that it gives you this option, convert to stateful widget. And if I click on that, magically like converts our stateless widget into a stateful widget and saves us some time there. Cool. So now things are formatted as we would expect. But again, right now, even though it's a stateful widget, we aren't actually managing any state within this. So let's go ahead and start managing some state. So to start off within this home state component, I'm going to initialize an int variable. I'm going to call it image number. And to start, I'm going to set it to 1062, which is what I have here. Now I'm actually going to replace this here. So I can use a template literal similar to JavaScript by doing $sign and then the name of the variables. If I do image number, cool. So essentially what this does is it'll take whatever the value of image number is and put that into our string here. So let's go ahead and click save and make sure that I haven't broken anything. Oops.
That semicolon line number 10.
Yes, always a semicolon, God. Let's see, refresh. Cool. All right, looks like I haven't broken anything yet. All right, so we have our state variable. Let's go ahead and actually set a function that will allow us to change this variable. So I'm going to create a function. Void just indicates that this is not returning any sort of value. Oops, sorry, thinking in JavaScript right now. I'm going to call it randomize image. Cool. And then within here, I'm going to call our set state method, and I'm going to randomize the image number. So the way that I do that is I'll need to import, and I'm just gonna, a package called Dart Math. Cool. And that'll essentially give us a method called random, similar to what you have with JavaScript, like math.random, right? So we can do random as the type. I'm going to set the variable name to random, and just going to initialize a new random. Okay, cool. And then I can use that to generate a random number. So random next int. And I know that this like syntax may not be familiar, but I mean high level, just creating a random integer, right? And I'm going to say that it has to be between 0 and 10. Cool. All right. So this random variable, or this randomize image function should change the image number to some random integer between 0 and 10. And then because we're calling it here, it should, change the state, which will cause it to rebuild. Image number will be something different. So now our image should be something different. Great. So let's go ahead and save that and see if we have broken anything. Cool, nothing's broken, but we're still not randomizing anything, right? We have to actually call our method. So if we go here, on press, we're going to change it to that function that we built over there. So randomize image. So now if we click that floating action button, we would expect the image to actually change. Let's see. Awesome, we got it working. So now anytime that I click this button, it should generate a new image based on our image number variable up here. Awesome, we got it working. So before I close this out, are there any questions with how we manage state or anything that I talked about thus far?
I have a question. It's not directly, what you did is very clear. Thank you very much. If I was going to do the same thing with React, wouldn't I need, in order to manage state, also do Redux? So is that like I can do everything I need, just start?
So if you wanted to manage application state, then yes, you would, or you wouldn't have to use Redux, but you might use Redux. But you could actually just use React hook to manage state within the component, right? So you could like initialize a state variable using useState, the hook provided by React. So you wouldn't have to necessarily use Redux.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you compare, if you could do everything that we just did in React, which one do you recommend?
I mean, I think what we did is like fairly straightforward. So I don't know if it's necessarily like the best indicator of like, or way to like compare the two. I think that what I really liked about this is that we have a lot of things right out of the box, right? Like, especially with the UI, we didn't even have to apply like any styling or anything, and things were centered, like things were placed exactly where we wanted them to, because that scaffold widget provided, the general layout for us. Whereas with React, you would have to, I don't know, use a grid or use Flexbox or something to style things and get them in place. So I think there's a lot of
HTML. You're saying no.
Yeah. So, and like all the work we did was essentially just in one file, right? So I don't know. It's to each their own, but I really enjoyed, at least with these projects, doing it in Flutter. And to your point about Redux, there is actually a package where you can use Redux with Flutter. Cool. I will have time for questions, but I'll just close this out so that we can have time for like general questions. Cool. So
what is the Flutter? What is the Flutter here?
The Flutter?
Is the container, it's the library, it's like we saw Dart.
Yeah, so Flutter is the tool, so like the widgets and all that's provided by Flutter, and Flutter is what is actually compiling our Dart code into iOS or Android. So there's sort of two parts to Flutter. First is the API that gives us widgets and methods that make development easier. And then the other part is the actual SDK, which compiles our code.
Okay, I think I get it. I think I call it container. It's the container.
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by container, but yeah, I guess
maybe
it's sort of.
Could be the framework, right? Flutter is the framework. Yeah. Dart is the language.
Yeah. Exactly.
Kind of like JavaScript's the language, React's the framework.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, just to close out, first of all, thank you all for joining and asking so many great questions. I don't have much more, or I guess that's pretty much all it, but I did provide some additional resources for all of you in the slides. This first one is a really great crash course on YouTube. It's like 3 hours, but by the end of it, like you build a quiz app that has several different widgets and manages state. So it's a really great way to get started. And then obviously I've linked to the Flutter documents, as well as a list of Flutter packages that you can use in your applications. And then finally FlutLab, which again is that editor where you can build applications and run them on a simulator online.
Beautiful. How do we get the resources?
Yeah, Vijay, I don't know. I can.
Yeah, you can just send me a link. Yeah.
Okay,
cool. We can drop a link in the chat here too.
Here, yeah. Those are the links. It should be open to the public, but let me know if you have any access issues. But everything's there and the links should be clickable through there.
Yeah. So first off, good presentation. It was actually really cool to see you live code and demo. I wanted to just let people know too, above Sylvia's link, or Sylvana's link is a link for tonight. Let us know how we did. It's a simple poll. The feedback he gives us help us improve these meetups and make them better. Ultimately, it's for you, right? We want to help you have content that is relevant to you and helps you with your career and helps you become a better programmer. So whatever you say, we take pretty seriously. It's a good chance to just kind of let us know how we're doing. And then I'm going to also just reiterate that I'm available on LinkedIn. You can follow me here if you want, or you can connect with me, whatever you choose. The website for us is javascriptla.net if you want to see more meetups. And then Sylvana, if you want to also drop in a link for Codecademy, that's totally appropriate, fine. Just so people can see what is interesting at Codecademy and how they can get better at coding. I also just want to open it up again to more questions. So feel free at this time to just ask about anything. It could be related to this presentation. It can also be related to code, whatever's on your mind as far as like how to get better at programming, whatever you want. We're kind of open at this time to discussion. And then the last thing is, please keep it professional. Don't say anything you might regret later. All right, so while that is going on, I'll also just kind of, I don't know. So in your opinion, Sylvana, like, what do you think, I think we kind of hinted at it with the last part of, this presentation. But what do you think about Dart versus JavaScript? Do you feel like Dart is something that could replace JavaScript? You know, all the hype, given like people discovered you don't need HTML and it works with iOS and Android on top of that. Is this a good contender?
I think it is. The only caveat there, which maybe isn't that important, is that I don't really see a whole lot of application of Dart outside of Flutter, right? Like it's super useful within the framework of Flutter, but outside of Dart, I haven't actually seen very many applications of it.
That's true.
But I guess in terms of, you know, web development, you're going to want to use it with Flutter. So with the two paired, I think it's definitely a great, you know, alternative to JavaScript and could, you know, and give it a run for its money.
Yeah, I mean, like for a long time, JavaScript has been unchallenged. It's still the #1 way, and exactly for the reason you just mentioned too, right? You know, outside of Flutter, what are you going to do? You need JavaScript. So it's kind of, it's going to be staying around for a long time. But that said, like, you know, I have been seeing like in the last several years, like movements towards getting away from, you know, JavaScript to something more typed, more, you know, structured, safe, you know, and I think like it's always been like around the coding community, like, cause we're all doing similar stuff. We're either doing app development or web development, replacing pictures on some, you know, frame, and then like we're adding handlers to it, and then we're following design patterns and stuff like that to make sure that our app like works with other parts of apps and using modules. So at the end of the day, like, I mean, if you get that, right, like that is more or less like what we do. The language part is kind of like just, you know, it's either helping us or it's in the way. And so like languages naturally evolve just like human speech evolves. So maybe, you know, like maybe it's time to rethink like, you know, using JavaScript. Maybe it's time to rethink like how we do things. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And anybody else's thoughts on this time?
I have a question. We're speaking about how low level you can get with the API to native. You want to open camera, make a phone call. Is that available as easily as what we've seen?
Yeah, so one of the things that I mentioned is that the packages on Flutter are really well maintained. So there are a lot of packages that will allow you to do things like that. Like there's, you know, let's say you want your app to scan QR codes. There's like a package for that. And, you know, React Native also provides things like that as well. And this is, you know, very much just me, but I found that with React Native, a lot of times, like I had to go through a couple different packages before I found one where like the documentation was up to date or it was actually working with like the latest version of React Native. So I had less of that with Flutter. I found that most of them were really well maintained and up to date. So, but yes, to answer your question, there are packages to allow you to do such things.
Wonderful. Is there an internal database like Sqlite or?
No, yeah. So you would want to, you know, do something, use some other framework or end language for your backend stuff. But yeah, this is all like front end.
But I'm sure there are best practices for stuff like that. You know, especially if you did want to use like some of this for your backend, or I guess you want to work with, you know, SQL still. Like I'm sure there are paradigms that they have.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I've been using like APIs for all of the apps that I've built. But yeah, I'm sure there's like, you know, yeah, recommended best practices when it comes to, you know, I feel like my intuition is that because it is a Google framework that Firebase is probably like the recommended route to go, but yeah, there's probably other alternatives for, yeah.
That's actually a good question, or a good thing to think about. Like backends, for the most part, from what I've seen so far, are becoming more and more, you know, like kind of the whole process is becoming abstracted, because like a lot of stuff that, you know, like you used to have to write in the old days, like SQL database connections and all that, you no longer need to. Like a lot of that is taken care of with like these frameworks, like just like you mentioned, Firebase, like making the connection. And then like I think with technologies like Google or even Amazon too, right? Like it's like next level where you can spin it up as a service and use it as you need with scaling provided. Are people here familiar with that? Are people doing that here on this call? Like, I'm just curious. Can we get some feedback if anybody wants to provide it, obviously, and you can do that in the chat too if you hate the sound of your own voice. And you could just drop us some feedback here, but that would just be good to know, like what is everybody into, like, and what is everybody's experience level with using things?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mike. I just been working on a React Native application. I don't really do a lot of mobile apps, but COVID inspired me to just branch out from web development. And I was looking at React Native and trying to learn it. And I have an app that's kind of like Waze for walking. It takes makes use of WebSockets, Google Maps API, and geolocation. And I have a MongoDB and a Node.js backend. And I just use API calls to reach out to the database and get data, as an example. Nice.
So you're basically using Mongo kind of like for your backend, right? Is that kind of like?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, Mongo's really robust.
Yeah, I'm considering rewriting the front end of the app with Flutter just to see the pros and cons, because I really can't get into the groove of React. I've been trying to buy in on it, and I just can't. It just doesn't make sense to me. For the most part.
That's how I felt. Do you come from like a React background of using React, or?
No, I'm old school HTML. I've Rails and stuff like that. And when I got React, even React.js, I just think it just seems like it complicates the process. So I've constantly been trying to say, why is this better than just straight ahead, Rails or JavaScript and Node.js? I just have a hard time conceptualizing the ease of development, and then React on top of it doesn't make sense.
Okay, so you opened up a can of worms here. So, yeah. I want you to just kind of like briefly elaborate, because this is really good for us as well as the group. Like, and just even for me personally too, because like I like hearing about these kind of discussions. What is it about React that is complicated?
The state management have always seemed complicated to me, and I always think, well, I never really had an issue with this regular application, so why is what I'm reading about in React seems so much more complicated? Because I've been trying to learn Redux, and I'll have to write so much code just to make it work, and it still doesn't make sense. And then I just have simple JavaScript going back and forth. Otherwise, with my other apps, React Native makes sense for mobile because I don't want to do Java,
Yeah. So ease of use with the API, I guess. Like with JavaScript, you get to directly manipulate the DOM, and like what you do is what you get. Whereas with React, you're kind of like using a middleman or a middle thing. Yeah.
So
you
for
have
me,
to be really careful.
Slows me down, but maybe I'm just an old man. I don't know. That's what it makes me feel like.
You don't sound like an old man on the phone.
Well, okay. I can tell you that I am like the legacy developer, years of legacy, and but I always try to keep myself up to date as much as I can. So my one solution, you mentioned web services. My solution to kind of do what I'm best at, like backend, and still connect whatever I want to do, like on a phone app, was passing JSON string back and forth, through services. So there was a way to bridge these, technologies.
Yeah. So something you're also advocating for something simple, right? Like some kind of simple config file to basically just kind of share between, two different languages. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
No, what I was getting at that JSON string can contain all of my data, and I can have it, like in my case, we were building iPhone calendaring management, right? Shift scheduling, blah, blah. So there was a Sqlite that was storing all the data locally. And then there was a backend server that was really the database. And in order to pass the data and synchronize back and forth, we were just using JSON string on a REST code.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, yeah, there's still a lot of different ways to do things. You can do stuff the old way, kind of. You can use SQL. You can still use JSON. You can use services. If you don't like services, you might want to just try engineering it yourself, just for the practice. Just kind of like, if you wanted to learn like how to set up your own like, server that has like a database on it. I think it's a good exercise, and making queries to it with Node.js or something like, it could be like a different backend. It could be Java Spring, that returns back your payloads if you want to do that. And then you could keep your front end, something different, maybe React, or you could use AngularJS or Dart. There's a lot of different ways to do things, and I guess like it comes back to just kind of like, for me, like I'm really interested in hearing like what are sort of the pain points with people, what are they struggling with? But then when you watch a presentation like this, do you feel like, like you learned something new, and do you feel like you can do whatever you're trying to do a lot easier? Like those are things that we're interested in.
I can tell you, if you're trying to figure out what content people are interested in, I tell you, I'm always watching for a session where I can learn something. I'm sorry that I have to say it, but there was a couple of times that I came in and there was like pitching a product. I wish I could kind of glean into that from the promotion of the event, but this was perfect. And from learning something like that, like building something simple, getting just introduction to the technology, now I can go and I can learn on my own, and so other than that, I'm saying this is perfect. If you want to build on that, I would be interested in sort of like problem solution. So
excellent.
If you wanna build I don't know, I'm trying to think of a problem that would be very common. You want to build a catalog of something, whatever, of images or whatever. How can you, if you can, I don't know how easily it is for you to retain people to present.
Oh, it's easy. Like we have a way better community than we've ever had in years. So, if you are all looking for people to talk about a particular piece of technology, like say GraphQL, right? We can get the people. If you want to talk to people from Google, we can get the people. If you want to talk to people from Amazon, want to talk to people from Facebook. Like, so for me, like, it's just more and I'm naturally curious. So like, I'll reach out to these people myself and I'll ask about what they're working on. And, if they can share it, then we'll do it. It's just really like, for me, I'm really interested in hearing, like from the audience and just kind of like getting the feedback.
This is fantastic. So you're willing to create those events a la carte based on requests?
That's right.
So what is your communication line? What's your inbox for requests?
Just add me on LinkedIn. I gave it to you twice today, like in the meetup. I'll put it one more time too. And then also, let's see here. You can follow the group. You can go to javascriptla.net, be on the mailing list. I read every single email that comes back when somebody replies to that, even though it doesn't really have a reply. So if you like what you see, let me know I'm doing good. If you hate it, let me know. But yeah, like for me too, and this is more for you, Sylvana, like, one of the questions that I, on my side of the world is like, how do we make things scale, right? And so like it's always great to use like a simple new framework, a shiny new framework. But then like the question is like, how do we, make sure that these things that we're building don't get complicated over time? And how do we, make sure everybody's on board with it? If we're going to build a certain way, are there things we can use in place? So maybe like the simple way to answer that with this question is like, what are the things you like about Dart and Flutter so far? Like, do you feel like it's easy to maintain, and do you think you could scale a pretty good application up if you had to? If this was your own startup.
Yeah, I don't know if I would trust myself to start a startup, but yeah, I think that there's sort of, this is like a good thing and a bad thing. I think that with Flutter, I really like that everything is in one place. I sort of, alluded to this before, right? But you don't have to, have a style that corresponds to a component, or you don't have to, use CSS and JS like Emotion or something like that. Like, it's all out of the box. You have your styles with your components. A lot of times you don't even have to style because the layouts are provided for you. So I feel like there are sort of less files to deal with, which I that's like a pet peeve of mine, is like how a company decides to, break out their files and keep things in order. So I feel like that's pretty easy to do. And there are clear, like, there are some ways that Flutter sort of enforces those best practices. Like, for example, when it comes to assets, like, you have to put them in a very specific folder, otherwise they won't be rendered. So it's sort of, built in that you're following these best practices in some ways. But yeah, I also feel like I would have to think about more like how to scale this. I think also being like setting expectations around how to break up your widgets, because as you can see, like, even just this small little application, there were so many like widgets within a widget within a widget. So like, yeah, I think that would definitely be like a big consideration, is like, okay, when do we decide to break it out into another widget? Like, so I think there would definitely have to be conversations around that point. But yeah,
like a part 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I would be interested, for example, to know what's out there in the world has been built with this technology, with Dart and Flutter. And
yeah, that's what I was going to also ask you. Yeah, like, do you have any repos that you like? Because I'm always like saving repos and just like forking, just coming back to them, rereading them from time to time if I needed anything.
Yeah, there's so I'll put this in here. So there's a like part of the Flutter docs that showcases like applications that use Flutter. I don't think any of these actually show repos. I don't know if there are any, large applications that show, their code. But yeah, you can see there like a list of companies that are using Flutter in some capacity.
Yeah, and if the answer to this question is, hey, how is so and so using this technology at their company, we'll find out. We'll try to like ask some of the people there, and we'll see if we can get a meetup about it.
Yeah, I would love to attend that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the adoption is definitely a bit slow. I think React Native was like, first one there. So they, sort of got dibs on, the mobile development real estate market. So I feel like a lot of companies sort of jumped on that when it came to mobile development. I've read some articles of like companies who decided to switch from React Native to Flutter. But I think there's slow adoption, but I think it's all, it's also always a lot of work to go from one framework to another. So
yeah. And if anybody here isn't like an engineering person or an engineering manager, please talk to me, because I'd love to know like how you guys are handling code changes and working with, large databases, large, apps of code. How do you make your decisions about like, moving from one framework to another and so on. So that'll be good stuff to know. All right, I guess we can kind of start to wind down. This can be kind of like the last call for questions or comments. And after that, we can pretty much call it a night. So just doing that right now.
I have to ask another question.
Sure.
When I'm thinking of the next thing, next product I want to build or whatever, right? So I'm starting with what I see in front of me, what everybody's talking about, let's say like blockchain, okay? And then when I'm reviewing a technology like now, I want to find, does this lend itself into this other thing? So where can you make those connections?
So you're asking specifically like, if you're comparing one framework to another, like what exactly are you asking here with this last question? Like criteria was?
No, I want to say it's like if I want to get into blockchain, okay. So I mean, I know one door would be like if I want to do Ethereum, I'm gonna learn Solidity, and I'm gonna go that path, right?
Sure.
But I like to stay generalist. I like to get with some tool that I've learned once, and I can use it in number of ways. And I don't know if, like for example, if I went the Dart way, that I would never be able to reach that.
Yeah, I think like, so what it comes down to, at least from my own experience, and feel free anybody else to like just kind of give your experiences, but like hoping that you only have to use one language ever is kind of like a pipe dream, right? Like I think as developers, like we need to be more fluent at reading code, right? Whether it's one language or another. And so what I found was that by just like kind of learning other languages in addition to JavaScript, whereas like, let's say, I got into Python for a little bit, and I explored Python. That was really good for me because coming back to JavaScript later, I actually understood things about JavaScript much better, because like I found out, okay, JavaScript doesn't have types, right? Like it's something that you take for granted in JavaScript, whereas in Python or Java, you actually do have strict types. And so like when you see things like TypeScript come down the rail, or like you see things in Dart, it makes a little bit more sense. Like same thing kind of going into like blockchain, right? Like, so some of it you're learning what blockchain is and Web3 and all that, but you also have the JavaScript that you can fall back on. So you're like, for me, you're always sort of just playing around like with ideas, trying to learn it. And I guess like it goes, if you want to keep anything, if you want to like go into anything and just kind of like say, all right, well, what are the fundamentals? What are the things I should know before I start any project? Like the one thing I can see that's consistent over time, it's probably just going to be like the more higher level concepts that you learn from software engineering, right? Like, are we following design patterns? Are we, thinking through steps? What's the algorithm, right? Like in some ways you might want to even just like check and see what the algorithm is like in plain English, right? Like that's something that I do. Like a lot of people in this group are into lead coding. And so, people will first identify a problem and try to think it out conceptually in English. And then they'll attempt to solve it out in like code. So for me, like I would use Python as a simple way to write stuff out. And then like from there, I translate it over to JavaScript or whatever other language. But you're always just playing around and reading a lot, doing code fluency stuff, stuff to help your code fluency. So that when you look at new things like this new technology, it's not like, sit there and struggle with syntax, it just kind of comes to you faster.
Yeah, thank you.
That's pretty much the last question, right? If anybody has a burning question, This is it. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. All right, cool. Thank you everybody for joining. You know how to find me now, hopefully, and you know how to find Sylvana. Hope to see you at the next meetup. There is also tomorrow. This is on our website if you want to go check it out, javascriptla.net. That's for anybody who wants to learn React basics and REST API basics. So you'll want to go check that out. It's our friend Kintone. So I'll put a link for that in the chat. And yeah, just basically, keep me in your LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out to me from time to time. And thank you for joining. And thank you, Sylvana, for presenting.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.
Right.